Most Metro Vancouver residents know nothing about the first superstore in Richmond, nor are they aware that it was founded by a Chinese-Canadian entrepreneur named Ling Lam. Hongwo General Store existed in Steveston from 1895 to 1971. Now, artist Marlene Yuan is recapturing this business in a series of prints called Piece Together, Living in Harmony. It's part of the Richmond Art Gallery's Foodways exhibition. And nearby, the City of Richmond Archives is also presenting a pop-up exhibition called Hongwo. I'm pleased to be joined by Marlene Yuan to talk about her work. Thanks for joining me, Marlene.
Thank you for inviting me.
Before we get to piece together Living in Harmony, can you start by describing your artistic practice?
Well, it can really vary. It can be drawings, it can be bookworks, and it can be comics. So it depends on the project. The recent works showing at Richmond are all done through printmaking processes. So however, they have either started as drawings, and then the drawings got transferred and then made into prints. So it really does, there's evolution of how I make. So there's very steps, multiple steps.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so what sparked your interest in Hongwo General Store?
Well, to be honest, I didn't know about Hongwo until recently. A lot of my artwork focuses on Chinese Canadian history, and I do incorporate research with my art making. So I remember beginning of this year, curator Zoe Chan approached me and just said, "Hey, just how's it going?" And then I said, "Oh, it's hard to get started. I know she wanted me to work on a new piece for Foodways, but I wasn't really sure how to go about it." And so she introduced me to Devel Bowie, who is the archivist for the City of Richmond. And it's like, "Oh, well, you should meet with Devel, and she may have some ideas, just to have it more focused on Richmond." And so I am not a Richmond resident. I'm very much, I was like a East fan. And
So you know the history of Chinatown.
yeah, I know a lot more about Chinatown, and I spent a lot of time my school years in North Burnaby, but like a lot of it has been like East Van. Um, so then meeting Devel, she introduced me to Hongwo, and she explained to me that it was basically Richmond's first superstore, and then she had a lot of archival imagery and records, newspaper clippings. So I found that really quite interesting, and I was like, "Well, wow, how come?" And because Steveston is like a fishing village, right, with lots of cannery workers. So it's I have made a piece about cannery workers in the past. So just learning more and more about Chinese Canadian past was very significant. And it just like, it felt right to me just because of a lot of the research I've done. So, and then also to put a focus on Richmond residents. But sometimes I found when looking at records and clippings, I was asking Devel, are there any living people who still have a connection to Hongwo? And she said yes, and she recommended Harold Steves, who was a longtime
Living
counselor of
legend and
the
Steveston.
legend,
Yeah.
right? Very much. And so I made an appointment with Harold Steves and went to his home, and where in his basement he actually has a little museum. Basically, he really wants to make this Hongwo museum. So just before Hongwo closed, and it had been closed for a while, but the building was going to be demolished. And when he found that out, he had a key because he's a friend of the family. He went in and salvaged as much of items he could, and he was hoping that these items would be one day in the museum. And he still has that hope. So it's just that, finding the space and funding to make a museum about Hongo would be, I think, is the biggest challenge. Right? So right now it lives in Harold Steve's basement a
That's
lot.
very, very interesting. And Harold Steves, for anyone watching, he's a longtime city councillor, former MLA,
Mhm.
and the founder, really, of the Agricultural Land Reserve in BC. Now, what have you learned, Marlene, about the original owner, Ling Lam?
Well, he was very much an entrepreneur. He came to Canada through Victoria and then ended up working for, I think, through the cannery work of some sort. I I don't have the exact notes here, but he ended up just even like learning to make bread and selling it door to door. He was very much an entrepreneur. He was hardworking, just from reading all the articles. Even his family would say in the records that he almost never took a day off. They never saw him in regular dress. He was often wearing a suit, very hardworking. It wasn't just a general store. It provided, Ling Lam also owned farmland. And on the farmland, there were greenhouses that grew a lot of cucumbers, a lot of like tomatoes, strawberries. So he also had a pickling facility. So that was I think there's also, he created a way of pickling and sorting the pickles. And then also the cucumbers would often go off to other distributors that like, such as Natalie's. So there were like, he was a big deal.
Well, that's really impressive when you think of, this was a period of discrimination and challenges, yet he was able to do so much. One of the things, Marlene, is some people think of the Chinese presence in Richmond as a relatively recent phenomenon, maybe unlike Victoria or Vancouver. And I'm wondering why you feel it was important to highlight the history.
Of Ling Lam
Yeah,
or
or just that
Hopewell.
that there is that there was this Chinese history in Richmond, which, has maybe not received as much attention as, say, and I noticed it's happened in Burnaby too, where
Yes.
Denise Fong, when she was at the Burnaby Museum, did a ton of research and really did fantastic work in helping us understand this rich history that had been invisible for so many years.
Yeah, it's definitely like people don't realize how like rich and diverse certain areas of the lower mainland have been. For example, when talk about Harold Steves again, but he was saying that the translation of the Chinese character of Hongwo kind of translated to be pieced together or slash living in harmony. And he said at the height of Hongwo's presence in Steveston, it was serving a very diverse community, such as he was saying, there's a lot of Chinese Canadians, there were a lot of Japanese Canadians, there were indigenous,
Yeah, indigenous were working in
right?
the processing plants. Yeah.
Right. And also Western settlers. So he saw that as the four communities as living in harmony. So that's why he takes so much pride in honoring the diverse communities, and Hongwo is so important to him.
That's interesting. You've explained the title of your exhibition.
Kind of, pretty much. But I chose it because I thought, well, I didn't want to just name it Hongwo, but then I was thinking about all the different communities and people who have contributed and, have fond memories of either working there or buying a chocolate bar or a bag of chips. It also was a hardware store. So it served many purposes.
There were the diverse communities in Steveston, 100 years ago. Nowadays, it's like there are many Chinese communities. Like, we've got the descendants of the pioneers. There are people from the People's Republic of China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Southeast Asia, other countries. I've wondered, I wonder if you've thought about what artists can do to reflect or depict the diversity of people who might consider themselves Chinese Canadians.
Artwork, artists. I've seen many artists do various things. It can be public art. Like for example, I recently did a mural about it was at the Chinese Canadian Museum. It's unfortunately no longer there, but there's various ways of showing the history of Chinese Canadian. So I've noticed that Janet Wang, who is a Chinese Canadian artist, she has done some animation. So it's been great to see the contemporary artists try to reach out and through their art. And then I know recently there has been a public art project at Burnaby Art Gallery just outside on the grounds, and they look like stones, but they're like black and white stones, and it's by Nathan Lee. So when they were cleaning out Separately House, they found some game pieces of Chinese Canadian laborers, like basically almost like go pieces, like
Interesting.
yeah. So then Nathan made a piece about it just to remind everyone the presence of like Chinese laborers, and a lot of them were like gardeners or vegetable growers. So there's different approaches, and I find like I'm always learning as a Chinese Canadian and as an artist from
And
others.
uh, and are there any stereotypes that you want to break down through your art? Does that cross your mind, or do you just say, I'm just going to do this piece?
Sometimes, it depends. It depends on location. Sometimes for the show at Foodways, I really want it to feel very immersive, and I felt like I want to create the feeling of somewhat being in the store and um so it really depends on sometimes the shape of the location I'm working on, and if it's a wall such as the mural that I worked on last year, then I knew it would be just a very flat surface. So I do want to bring awareness of Chinese Canadians, and there are always going to be stereotypes.
Mhm.
But I
And
just mean just bringing awareness.
and how did you do the prints for this exhibition?
Yes, so there are two processes. And I would do them at different times of the week. So relief prints are like so if you go to the gallery, you might notice some candy bars, like the Kit Kats. And then so I would draw the Kit Kats on tracing paper, and then I would burnish it onto this rubbery material, which I would carve out, and then it would be inked up and then pressed onto the washi paper. So that would be called relief printing, like block printing. And then the other process I would use is screen printing, where I draw directly onto Mylar. And either if I don't draw onto the Mylar, I would draw directly onto paper and scan the drawings and get it repeated through Photoshop. So sometimes there is a bit of computer wizardry, but it just kind of helps the look of like many things,
And is there anything about like washi paper, why you went with that?
Yeah, it definitely was a very I really want to choose paper that would reflect the Asian population that was directly uh contributing, working, and like at the time of Hongwo, so the Chinese and Japanese. So a lot of it is washi from Japan. So I did interview Jeannie Ryan, who has family members of the Harada family who have contributed a lot to the Richmond Archives. And Jeannie, as a teenager, worked at Hongwo, and she is Japanese Canadian. And she was telling me about how one of her first jobs there was chopping up pork chops, and it was not her favorite thing. So I was just thinking a lot about her and like a lot of the Japanese Canadian workers. So
And
I
did you and did you say you have to get the washi paper from Japan, or
well, it
I've
does,
heard
but
there's
a
some
lot
that's
of it comes.
available in Toronto now.
It's you can get at Paper Yacht just across from my studio. So
Oh, okay.
all of it like but they were like, when are you finished this project, Marlene? You're depleting our paper. So some of
Yeah.
it is like there's some Chinese mulberry and rice paper, which I've got from Chinatown, and a lot of it is Japanese washi, and that comes from I didn't order it directly from Japan, but it did originate from Japan at some
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
And you also make zines, and I'm wondering what appeals to you in making zines.
I feel like zines are often really either like they're really fast to produce and you can sell them or trade them. So there's a lot of like a accessibility with zines. This you can go as simple as you made something, you drew or wrote something and you photocopy it and you staple it and you give it to a friend. So there's just a very immediate you can pass it along. You don't have to go through a publisher per se, but there's this underground kind of I was is definitely a big thing in the 90s when I was young. So there's zines haven't gone away. I think they've gotten quite fancy and some of them have gotten quite expensive, but like during my days, early days, people would just photocopy them
Was
and
more underground.
yeah.
Yeah. And then the opposite of that is public art, where you're doing something that you're commissioned for, sometimes for where people have high expectations and all of this. And I'm wondering what it's like for you to do public art, and where that stands in terms of all of the art that you do.
Public art, I think the most public art I've done is the mural at the Chinese Canadian Museum. And I felt that was a tall order because it was in for the opening of the new museum, and it was going to open on July 1st, which was known,
Yeah,
it was known as it
2023. Yeah, the 100th
2023.
anniversary of, yeah.
So it was a big deal. I wanted it to not feel like a stereotype, but also there were a lot of people who had requests of what they wanted in the mural. So sometimes when you're working with a client that you want to make them happy, you want as artists be happy, I didn't want to the Chinese Canadian community to be I wanted them to like it as well and identify with it. So it was just like, but I found out that most people liked it. So
Yeah. Well, you get more cooks in the kitchen, I guess.
yeah.
Now, you also, this will be my final question, Marlene, and then I can let you go. But you create art that intersects with ethnicity, culture, colonialist history, and the community. And I'm wondering what keeps you coming back to that theme in your art.
That's a great question because In 2017, I created quite a lot of comics about Chinese Canadian laborers, and it was for a labor museum in Hamilton, Ontario. And then when I was creating this, people like say, "Oh, why are you talking about the past? This everything's fine now. We're not, we're not a racist society." And then a few years later, we have the pandemic, and it kind
Yeah.
of proved that
Yeah. That was not
that
true. Yeah.
that was not true, and we need to keep reminding ourselves that this racism is not a thing that has gone away.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Marlene?
Please come to the show. There's
Yeah.
a lot of great artists, and I think Zoe and the team have done a great job in finding various artists through, it's not just BC based, but there's various artists from other provinces too.
Well, thank you very much. I've been speaking with Marlene Yuan. Her commission, Piece Together Living in Harmony, is part of the Foodways exhibition at the Richmond Art Gallery.
Thank you.